love America. I love the Constitution. I love the First Amendment. I want to carry and all else. I love property. And let me tell you something. If you care about your country, read Ludwig von Mises and the 6 lessons of the Austrian Economic School, motherfuckers.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading floor of the Merc, he's fought for every dollar he's ever earned. And now, with personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Sean Thompson. And this is the Sean Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
The Epoch Times, one of the best outlets we have access to, and I mean it. And the reason is it was founded by a woman who had to live under communists. Those are always the ones who make the best Americans, and they understand that you have to constantly remind people why communism, socialism, and Marxism leads to tragedy and death and mayhem. My next guest is an award-winning journalist and senior reporter for the Epoch Times. Frequently covers Capitol Hill, elections, and so much more, writing about energy, environment. In fact, he monitors the mores of a society even as it looks like it's devolving. His name is Nathan Worcester. How are you, Nathan?
Glad to be here, and thank you for that introduction. I hope I can live up to it. Wow.
Well, listen, I feel that way about Epoch Times. I mean, I think it's absolutely wonderful. I've been lucky enough to interview a lot of the people, mainly the founder. And you know, it's a very important paper. It's a very important perspective because we're inundated by government-approved propaganda. And there's only a handful of outlets that have maintained the integrity, and you're part of it. You're one of them. And it's interesting to see. I believe this is the most exciting time in America because all of the accusations and allegations made by people like me that says it's a duopoly of corruption and the government is a club, you ain't in it, it's an illusion of representation, it's never been more obvious to me.
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's the reality that a lot of people are leading to just find themselves questioning a lot as a result of not really knowing where to turn for objective information, because it can seem like everything coming at you, everything bombarding you has an agenda. And I try to make sure that what I'm doing is not limited in that way. I try to just call it as I see it.
And the beauty is that we have, being Chicagoans, and I'm talking to my audience now, for the most part, is that we are from the nucleus of the mafia and communist Marxist socialist agenda. They married, and they figured out how to make a tremendous amount of money and power from the collapse of a society. All they need are more and more people dependent on welfare to really attain that servitude, that slavery that Marxism and communism and socialism is. And what I like is that, unfortunately for them, there's this thing called the internet now. And we can go back just a handful of years ago to when Chicago's very own, I call him a bust-out married to a woman with really big feet, Barack Obama, who was late on his car payment, all mobbed up, had gangsters buy his property for him, make his car payments. When he went to Washington, D.C., that changed everything. That took the corruption that we tolerated under Clinton and he put it on steroids. And one of the things I love is how many people defended Barack Obama, which we can now refer to. For instance, this war power discussion you and I are going to have. I remember when it was reverse, when Barack Obama, who had killed tremendous amounts of people, bombed inadvertently innocent people, when he wanted to go into Libya. Do you remember Nancy Pelosi, 2011?
That whole conflict over whether or not that required a war powers resolution. Yeah, I mean, I can recall
Here it is.
over that. In fact, we came very close to pulling the trigger on that.
Now, Nathan, you've dealt with politicians and you've dealt with powerful people, mostly honest. When somebody worth $500 million from insider trading talks, I think it's really important we pay attention. Here she is.
So, Madam Speaker, or Madam Leader, you're saying that the president did not need authorization initially and still does not need any authorization from Congress on Libya?
Yes.
Thank you both.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nathan. The conference is over, and I like it because if she would have only given out a couple of stocks we could have bought back then, maybe we could have made a fortune, don't you think?
Yeah, interesting to consider. I think every time that there's a new conflict, something that, you know, depending upon who's in the White House, people are going to emphasize Article 1 versus Article 2. This is Congress's sphere versus the president's sphere. The reality is and I'm saying this as somebody I respect the Constitution. It seems as though the Congress long ago gave up its authority over war making, and so we're living in a world, we're living in the reality that the executive makes a lot of these decisions, seeks some degree of approval from Congress afterwards. And they don't always live up to what the Constitution initially authorized them to do, and what they then reinforced through the War Powers Act in the 20th century. I have to say it'll be interesting to watch this play out. I think it's certainly likely to be similar to the Venezuela War Powers Resolution battle. You did see a few Republicans in an initial procedural vote. They broke with the president, but they ultimately came back on side. This ultimately, though, is, I have to say, pretty symbolic in nature. Even if this were to move ahead, even if it were to pass, the president could veto it. So, there's a lot of sound and fury, a lot of attention to it. But at the end of the day, is it going to add up to much? That's an open question.
One of the problems, and I know you've encountered this, is the tolerance of the American people to live with scandal and live with corruption and live with fraud. And when we talk about this conflict specifically, I'm lucky enough to remember it from the standpoint of a kid in grade school at the time, and remember the Jimmy Carter years. Most people do not. And that's fair to say, right? Most people do not remember. And if they do, they're older and they don't have a platform or they're retired. But this particular conflict is a war that has been going on for 47 years with agreements that never mattered to the criminals calling themselves Iran. They never mattered any more than an oath matters in Chicago when an alderman takes it. It doesn't matter. Liars cannot give their word. That's another problem we have, isn't it?
I think it's interesting when I speak to people who can recall that late 70s, early 80s period, the hostage crisis, the strike on the Marine barracks in Beirut, the level of hostility that the, at that time, new regime showed, and the fact that they never really walked that back. I think for a lot of people who have not experienced that, it's and I would count myself in that group. I was not alive in 1978 and 79, 82 at any of these times. I think that makes it more understandable why there's this sense that, yes, we have needed to address Iran more seriously for a long time. At the same time, it's interesting now that we're getting a sense of what the objectives from the administration are. Are we going to be seeing a push for full-on regime change? Seems like we might instead see something similar to what we've seen in Venezuela, where instead there's a push perhaps to reshuffle the leadership. Could we see, something that lasts for 4 weeks, 5 weeks? We still do, I think, need to have those objectives defined. And finally, I don't know if you caught this, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he said this was, in a sense, a preemptive strike because there was the anticipation that Israel was going to move, the United States should then move as well. I think, looking at the way that this played out, it would be a mistake to approach this strike as though it's suddenly something that came out of nowhere and there had not been decades of provocations from Iran and its proxies. On the other hand, we still, I think, have a lot of questions as to how this is going to play out and how it came to be in the first place.
Well, this is the nice part about it. We can revisit all of this. And when you have half a century of an entire country and the people who are loyal to it, chanting death to civilization, which is what it is, death to the West, death to America, death to Israel. I've always been amazed at why people don't believe them. This is something, maybe you have to grow up in a rougher neighborhood to understand. When someone threatens you, they're serious. Believe them and handle it. And yet we've been lulled to sleep to think there were parchment agreements with people who live in a cult where they kill their own people. This is the other side of the coin. The 70s was also a great time to realize how many Iranians of good conscience and character had to leave with nothing, come here and across the world to start all over again and to hear their stories. You could never intellectually or financially support Iran. Yet we've had president after president, from Jimmy Carter in the beginning, who started to bribe the Ayatollah. If the guy's dressed in a costume like he's waiting for the birth of Christ, you're not going to lure him with money, are you?
No, I think what you're looking at is a combination of ideological hardliners. This has not changed. But you also have now the rise of the Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC. I've spoken to a lot of people in D.C., defense analyst types, many of whom I think would like to see this succeed. I think The worry is, have we knocked out all of the old people, all of the, frankly, the people who are not that serious? Have we left in these IRGC, the younger hardliners who might not be so ideological about the Islamic Revolution, but they want power and they don't want to be blown up? Is there going to be a way? Can we give some of those people carrots, or could we use sticks to get them on side? On the other hand, is it possible that eventually there could be some alternative brought in? One thing that I've appreciated from my understanding of the reporting on President Trump's thought process, as in so many of these other conflicts, he's not immediately rushing to the sort of person that I think Washington, D.C. would want to see fill that role. As much as Shah, the inheritor of the role of the Shah, he's somebody who probably represents a lot of Iranians. Not obvious that he could step into this role immediately if there is some change in the regime. I think that looking at that realistic perspective the president has taken, as he has done so far in Venezuela, maybe that gives us a clue as to what we're going to be seeing over the next few weeks as we might come closer to real denuclearization by Iran, or at least a commitment to no more enrichment. And yet at the same time, I got to say, Sean, something that stuck with me, a conversation I had was, seems like, and this is based on, I think, some of the intel assessments from the United States, the Iranians, even as they're failing, even as they're kind of just this hand reaching out from the water as it's drowning, they're going to cause as much trouble as they possibly can on the way down. So I'm certainly hoping that more Americans don't die in huge numbers here. I'm hoping that we can manage this conflict in a way that is decisive and can take us away from that legacy, that very sorry legacy of decades of provocations, aggression, and as you said, consistent message, not just of vague, not liking somebody or whatever. No, this is kind of like a petty neighborhood bully that will never stop trying to exact some sort of toll, never stop trying to take his piece of the action or whatever.
And you have the issue at hand of the Islamo-Nazi sympathizer who just shot up 17 people in Texas. And you have the reality of realizing, as I see it, and as I have done the research, in my mind, there's no question Joe Biden was an illegitimate president who stole the 2020 election. But that's beside the point when you think about the millions, potentially millions and millions of illegal aliens who are here, and a tremendous portion of them are sympathizers to this ideology, may in fact be assets of Iran itself, if not other communist regimes that want to see the fall of the West. So we have cells here we have to be very, very aware of. And I couldn't help but notice 15 illegal Iranians were arrested Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So this is obviously something the Trump administration is aware of as well, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that this, to bring it to what's happening on the Senate and the House side again, we've had this impasse over the DHS bill. Many Republicans now are pointing out that with the strike and then with the possibility of sleeper cells or other elements attempting to wreak havoc in the homeland, as we have already seen, most likely in the case of what happened in Austin, not far from where I am right now, by the way. Yes, this might be the time to actually get that DHS bill across the line if lawmakers are serious about preventing this inevitable sequel to the events that we've seen so far from playing out.
And, it's the part that nauseates me about this. We're the ones, we, America, and crooked politicians, we're the ones that financed the Taliban in the first place. And when you look at all of this, when you look at the corruption in our own government that allowed these terrorist cells to become rich, become armed, and now that it's happening on our shores, this is the play, right? The terrorists always attack the kids, the women, the children. This is how they operate, and that they're here. But yet I can't help but always remember we're the ones that started this. We did it to fight a proxy war with Russia, originally in Afghanistan. Remember Charlie Wilson's war and all that nonsense? And then
the war of attrition.
And then I remember
there's a case to be made. We did attrit them. There's a sense in which, unfortunately, we made it harder for Russia. We probably did make it harder for them. We probably did help drive them towards the collapse of the Soviet Union, but we also allied ourselves with this very ugly element. That's the reality.
And financed it. And do you know what I was thinking about when you look at you remember all of the nonsense during the Bush years, right? The Iran-Contra and all the rest of it. And then you remember what happened during the Clinton years. Mena, Arkansas, and the dope and the allegiance between the Middle East and the cartels, and specifically Central and South America. I can't help but think what Trump's doing when you pan back from it. He's destroying that infrastructure or at least attempting to, whether it's in Venezuela, because Venezuela had an agreement with the Middle East for decades, for years. They had that flight that nobody wanted to talk about under the Biden years that went from Tehran to Caracas, and nobody knows what was on the plane. Once a week, dope and money, who knows? So he takes out Venezuela. Now he goes after Iran. It could be he's destroying the infrastructure of the CIA in the way he destroyed the infrastructure of the teachers union. Did you ever think about it?
You know, it's interesting to consider that alongside the documentation that there is of Hezbollah as a proxy of Iran operating within South America through networks there of Middle Eastern immigrants. Yeah, no, I think that panning back in that way, I don't know if I find it entirely convincing. People have pointed out, however, that Iran has been selling its oil to China at a discount. There is a sense in which perhaps we're looking at something bigger geopolitically. On the other hand, I think considering the way that this has played out, considering how rapidly we've moved just in the past few weeks, I think, from seeing the protests on the streets of Iran to negotiations in Geneva, evidently failing, to these strikes. You know, some of this we're looking at maybe a bigger picture, and then I think there's also a sense in which we're seeing an attempt to bring, from the perspective of the United States, from the perspective of Israel, to trying to bring the Iran problem to some sort of a decisive conclusion. Again, we will have to see what happens. We'll have to see whether that is ultimately successful. Time will tell, but certainly looking at the past operations from President Trump, Venezuela, Maduro, last summer's strikes, you know, there seems to be a bias towards quick, decisive action. We'll, as I said, we'll have to just watch and observe as this plays out, and judge as we see the fruits of all of that.
So we're on air right now, and a scandal broke where a reporter allegedly was told by his producer to stop covering Iranians that are cheering for America. Are you seeing a concerted effort to really control the narrative and the perspective? I mean, after all, did you ever think, and I mean this, in all of your years covering this, you would see so many elected senators and congressmen defend the Ayatollah? Did you ever think you'd see it?
You know, it's interesting. This puts me in mind of a recent story that I covered. There are members of Congress who have been pushing, and this is after the capture of Maduro, the successful removal of an accused narco trafficker, somebody who's been, I think, pretty clearly involved in this network of fierce, direct, consistent opposition to the United States, its people, and its interests. You have had a push from lawmakers to repudiate the Monroe Doctrine, to say actually the United States should not operate in this concerted way with a view to how things happening right on its shores, right in its backyard. In the case of Venezuela, Cuba, Colombia, you have people who are trying to push back against that. So the notion that you would similarly have, and I have not seen whatever you're specifically referring to, but the notion that you would have something that seems like it comes a little too close to sympathy from lawmakers on Iran on that issue. I mean, I have to say, there's not a lot of consistency, unfortunately, from lawmakers when it comes to some of these obvious cases where you might be able to make the case in some instances of, oh, well, there's sympathy for people who, maybe they don't like the Shah, or rather, maybe they don't like the Iranian regime, but they also don't like aspects of what the United States has done. But if you go beyond that to really something that looks much more like sympathy for a very strongly, consistently anti-American regime, people are going to draw their own conclusions as to what the motivations there are.
Maybe we need enough people to see the videos and the articles and the pictures from Iran in 1972 to wake them up a little bit. But what I love is that you made time for me, and I know how busy you are. Please tell everybody at the Epoch Times how essential they are to freedom, liberty, and preserving Americanism. I really appreciate it, Nathan, for you taking time to join me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We'll be back with your calls and comments.
He will never negotiate his constitutional rights with the government. Live free or die on The Sean Thompson Show on AM 560. The Answer.